Greetings, y'all, with another episode of Apokalupsis Historia on this fine, muggy, warm December evening. As we are sitting here through some rain, looking forward to a cold front to hopefully come soon. And today, Chance and I are just going to be here to sort of shoot the breeze, just sort of debrief and put in retrospect the year of the channel, all the research we've done, all the little rabbit holes we have excavated essentially, and just maybe update everyone where we at in some of our readings, and more to come, and more ideas that we're gonna maybe bounce back and forth. Yeah, real loosey goosey, nothing too strict here. So hopefully you enjoy the chat that we have planned for you here tonight. Hopefully, otherwise you have a great new year, and we will see you right after the music.
Welcome back, folks. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Any of you folks in the Southern Hemisphere, Happy Summer Solstice. To the rest of us, Happy Winter Solstice. Almost coming up here on the 12 Days of Christmas. If you anybody familiar with the song, but also Shakespeare's Twelfth Night.
Subscribe, Shakespeare reference.
So maybe you have to do a live stream for Twelfth Night on the 12th night of Christmas or something, maybe. But have a hodgepodge of things to talk about today. I got a list or an outline. Just kind of want to touch on a bunch of different things. Let me see. I've been reading like a million different essays. Like, that's a little hyperbolic, but only just a little. Like, I've been ransacking JSTOR. I've been ransacking archive.org, ransacking academia.edu, trying to find any essays that are talking about attribution for any Shakespeare stuff, or attribution for any authors other than Shakespeare, like Middleton or Dekker or Webster, Drayton. Trying to find essays that talk about Shakespeare alongside with some of these names. And one of the ones that I came up with in particular is an essay from the Shakespeare Quarterly from 2014. 2014 seems to be a pretty lucrative year. I don't know why, but there seems to be a bunch of good essays from specifically this year. But this is called Michael Drayton, Shakespeare's Shadow by Megan C. Andrews. And we're not going to read this whole essay today. Sometimes, that's our shtick, where we put on the whole essay and we walk it through and talk about it. We may do one in the future over this, but I do want to read the opening paragraph to kind of get people's mindset going. So, this essay considers a Warwickshire native, which Stratford is in the county of Warwickshire. So, this essay considers a Warwickshire native, the son of a butcher tanner, who became one of the most foremost poets and playwrights of early modern England. Born in the early 1560s, he moved to London around 1590 and made a living through his pen. He bought a share in a playhouse lease and acquired a coat of arms, thereafter identifying himself by his new rank on the title pages of his works. He was acquainted with John Hall, Thomas Green, and Thomas Morley. While he lived much of his life in London, he returned to his native Warwickshire, and in 1616 he was supposedly in Stratford of Avon in an infamous night of carousing recorded in John Ward's Commonplace book. Who am I talking about there? Who is Megan C. Andrews writing about? Surely it's Shakespeare, right? There can't be another person with that biography as well. Only Shakespeare comes some random guy from Warwickshire that comes into London at 1590 and then makes a living through his pen, and then becomes a share in the playhouse, gets a coat of arms because he's so successful in writing. No, she's not writing about Stratford. She's not writing about Shakespeare. She's writing about Michael Drayton. Michael Drayton has almost the same kind of exact biography as Shakespeare. And, to any Stratfordian that's thinks that the Shakespeare authorship question's unfair, this is good evidence for, yeah, it is a little unfair. Why aren't we asking about Drayton? And then, to anybody out there that doesn't think that the Drayton and Shakespeare question are related, clearly they got to be somewhat related. Like,
yeah, a guy in the exact near the same time period. Right. I imagine those places are only so big, and it's just like, hey man, like you're from Warwickshire. Oh man, me too. And like, there's only so many people doing this sort of profession or whatever, and just the small circles that we're really finding here,
And then if you've been tuning into our channel, we've mentioned Michael Drayton a lot. Our group Theory Wins video, we talk about Michael Drayton a good bit. In our Essential Readings video, we talk about Michael Drayton a good bit. Sonnet video, we talk about Michael Drayton. And specifically, I want to go all the way back to like maybe the start when John Stotzenberg says that Shakespeare's plays are like primarily written by two dudes, Thomas Dekker and Michael Drayton. And so it's like, okay, Michael Drayton maybe is one of the main pins of Shakespeare, because one of the things that Stratfordians say about Shakespeare is that Shakespeare has to be Shakespeare because there's Warwickshire dialect all throughout these plays. And so who else but Shakespeare could be writing that? It's like, Michael Drayton, duh, easy. And like, furthermore, at some point Michael Drayton very literally is Shakespeare in a technical sense, that at least one play, if not more, by Michael Drayton was printed as Shakespeare. So Sir John Oldcastle gets printed as Shakespeare. That is a Drayton play. So like, I know that's a little technicality, but there maybe is more than just that technicality, and there's more than just this little grain of truth to it, that maybe at large what we have here is that Michael Drayton is one of the group of writers that gets compiled to become Shakespeare. Or perhaps that it's already Shakespeare, and when it's written for the Admiral's men, these are the names that are used, but then when it gets moved over to the Chamberlain's men, that's when they have the opportunity to put the Shakespeare moniker on it. Not sure exactly why that's the case, but at some point it's a marketable name. And one thing I do want to point out that like makes Shakespeare different than pretty much all these other writers that we've been showing on these charts. How many of these guys are actually actors? Like, I've heard Ben Johnson's an actor, but he's not like a very good actor. He's like Quentin Tarantino, kind of. Like, yeah, Tarantino's technically an actor, but like, if he wasn't writer and director, he wouldn't be in movies, I feel like that's kind of how Ben Jonson is. But Shakespeare's supposed to be, a solid, you can put him in whether he writes the thing or not. And, seems like none of these other guys, especially these Henslowe guys, are actors as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, folks. Maybe there's some other ones, but I feel like Fletcher and Beaumont are both primarily... Samuel Raleigh comes to mind. Samuel Raleigh is an actor that also is a writer, but like when I'm having to compare it to like Samuel Raleigh, when that's the best name, I don't know. But I digress. I want to go back to Michael Drayton for a second here, because... Sir John Oldcastle, who's printing that as Shakespeare? It's a guy named Thomas Pavier, which, shout out to Apollo Cobain, back when we did our live stream, he brought up Thomas Pavier, which I was pretty much ignorant of, and since then I've done a little bit of research, not near enough, but Thomas Pavier, in 1619, prints what's basically like an early release of, like, the Shakespeare folio, and so we have the Pavier quartos is what they're called. And so it's a collection of several Shakespeare plays, but before that, he's the one that's printing the Yorkshire tragedy under Shakespeare's name. He's the one that's printing Sir John Oldcastle under Shakespeare's name. And so, at some point, we need to look further into this Pavier character.
And the first part of Geronimo, the anonymous prequel to Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy.
Okay. Yeah, the false folio. And so it's interesting that in our last video, I brought up George Wilkins, and talked about the connection between Pericles and Yorkshire tragedy just a little bit. But one of the other connections between that is that it's Thomas Pavier that's printing all three. And so people trying to surmise that it's George Wilkins, that doesn't really account for the bibliographic evidence that we have here that it's Thomas Pavier. At some point, this is probably all your Henslowe crowd, which by 1608 or 1609, I don't know, you'd call it Henslowe crowd, but it's probably still the same cats. But I don't have a full framework here, but I think from this, if we can sort of start to connect it with the ideas that we're working with in our Henslowe Diary video, the ideas that we're working with in our Handy video, that forget about trying to put a one-to-one with Shakespeare for a second. Let's just look at the plays themselves. Let's look at where they're coming out of. Let's look at what data we do have on the ground at that time. And what do we have? We have Henslowe's diary that says Drayton, Dekker, Webster, Middleton, and a handful of other guys are all writing together and are writing plays that are extremely similar to the Shakespeare plays that we have. And if you read enough of these people and you read these Shakespeare plays, you can actually maybe spot them. And some of these essays of the million that I've been reading, some of them have been suggesting that, like, look, it's not just Webster that's stealing from Shakespeare. Shakespeare can steal from Webster too. It's not just Drayton stealing from Shakespeare. Shakespeare can steal from Drayton too. And at some point, I would like to argue that I don't know that there's much stealing happening, that it's the same people. And that for whatever reason, it's getting reworked for a different play company or a different play venue. But if you have a bunch of guys writing a movie or a play about one particular historical aspect and it does well, and you want to open it up in a venue that has slightly different expectations, slightly different demographic, you're going to get those same people to rewrite the movie because they know all that research. So I was reading an essay about the connection between the lost play of Pythagoras and Merchant of Venice. And we don't have this lost play of Pythagoras, but it's probably written by Dekker and maybe Drayton and maybe Chettle. It's a Henslowe play.
Usual suspects.
Right. But we don't have it because it's lost like many of the Henslowe plays. But this guy was arguing that you can see what's in the Pythagoras play based on looking at the other plays from the same time, from 1596-ish. And he was looking specifically at Merchant of Venice, and he was saying, look, Shakespeare doesn't have any heavy-duty amount of Pythagorean philosophy, and then 1596 and after, boom, you get all sorts of Pythagorean philosophy. And so he's saying it's probably because Shakespeare went and watched this Dekker play. And it's like, okay, Shakespeare went and watched this Dekker play and was so taken by Pythagoras that he's like, I'm going to learn Pythagorean philosophy and randomly put it into plays that aren't even about Pythagoras. Or perhaps the person that did all that research on the Pythagoras play, that wrote that Pythagoras play, when they're writing further plays, is putting some of those ideas back out into it, and that happens to get called Shakespeare. Makes way more sense to me. So yeah, that's the framework that we're going with, but I don't have a whole video. I don't have enough lined up. We can dive into this in a future video, but yeah, just a little nugget to go on from there. You want to talk about Yeats?
Yeah, I mean, it's this book that's called The Theater of the World, and I had maybe said, it makes me want to just pull up the Amazon review, because there's only one review that someone left of this on Amazon, and it's kind of tantalizing, and like I kind of know where some of the team lines are drawn, and dare I say, like alternative media or sort of conspiracy media and stuff like that, fringe, yeah, political sort of stuff. So the commenter definitely has judgment on like the contents of what the book is saying, and she's not really pitching, it's more of like how he interprets the information. So okay, so yeah, I have here's the book on Amazon. I must have gotten it somewhere. Well, yeah, I ordered it from Amazon, but it's this much, and I definitely did not pay it for that much for it. I don't know what the heck happened to that. But anyway, so we'll scroll down here, and yeah, so it's got ratings, but there's only one written review. Are you interested in the truth of how, let's be careful here, the Burbages helped revive the dangerous, dead magic arts of Roman theater, specifically Vitruvius, as a part of a very frightening rebirth of ancient satanic mysticism, Hermetics, known as the Renaissance? You'll be over your head. I feel safe as saying and loving it. This is solid academic work, valid and true on a much higher levels than casual readers, even Shakespeare fans are used to, and for me at least, a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't. She's not diving into any of the satanic connections in here or whatever. And yeah, I guess you have to have a little more knowledge to maybe bridge where that guy is sort of coming from, essentially. But yeah, I guess the idea is, and they have a picture, and maybe I'll throw up a picture up here on the screen of it, and I'll show Chance here. When he's talking about that Vitruvian magic, of course we all know the Vitruvian Man as depicted by Da Vinci, and how there's a sort of divine macrocosm, sort of human scaled up to the universe, and yada 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 ness, and but essentially, Vitruvius wrote a bunch of stuff about architecture and how to use sacred geometry in their design schemes and why it's important for this or that, and but essentially here, if anyone's familiar with, if you think about what a magic circle looks like or a pentagram, for either people that are worried about magic or if you're familiar with even people playing games or something like that, right? But so I'll show you here and I'll have it flash up on the screen. Okay. But you can kind of see, so it's like a circle, sometimes embedded and also inside of a hexagon. But it's been sort of like cut up with essentially a bunch of triangles, and then they've laid all this sacred geometry on it, and it's like a perfect way of like where the stage is supposed to be in relation to like all the people sitting, where the doors, yada yada. But I think where this commenter's coming from is that it looks like a giant sigil that you've got a bunch of people in. It's a quote unquote giving energy because they're all got their attention on the play on stage. Right. And we don't have to dive into the metaphysics of like or judgment call of like someone's using it, because I personally think that there's something to all that sort of stuff, how to correctly interpret or tell you like what it exactly means.
I'm not coming from like a Judeo-Christian standpoint where sigils mean bad, Satan, magic, like it.
Tools, all tools.
Sacred geometry is sacred geometry. They're nice shapes, and maybe there's stuff to it. That's generally my opinion.
And so this book is a lot about tracing John Dee's thoughts and his writings and how it influenced the public, and kind of inspires, or her argument inspires guys to make theaters like the Globe eventually later on. And so I'll kind of sum up some of this magic stuff here really quickly in this little paragraph I have highlighted here. And we'll go in, I'll somehow find some way to disseminate the content of this book in some fashion that I think makes sense for our content. There's just a lot of good, I could just book review it and kind of tell you what she says. But here's a little snippet of this idea of the globe. Even think about the name. The globe is, being this micro of the macrocosm, and I guess my point would be, is like if you can imitate something on a small scale, can it become something on a larger scale? That's just sympathetic magic or those sort of concepts, right? But here we go. The painting of the heavens in Burbage's theater with the images of the signs of the zodiac and of the planets would have been a matter of great importance, for apart from their practical use as a cover and for acoustics, the heavens emphasized and repeated the cosmic plan of the theater, based on the triangulations within the circle of the zodiac. They showed forth clearly that this was a, quote, theater of the world in which man, the microcosm, was to play his parts within the macrocosm.
Okay.
She's kind of, this, like I said, it still very much just kind of feels like a sympathetic magic, sort of metaphysic-y, sort of kind of take on these sort of things,
and it gets the hermetic as above, so below sort of thing. And to relate it back to what I was just talking about, that Pythagoras, all of a sudden all this Pythagorean philosophy starts coming up. Pythagoras literally coins the idea of all the world's a stage, And so like Pythagoras, I think, literally said that the world or life was like being in a spectacle or a game, and all the people around you are just spectators or participants in that game. But it translates into Renaissance era, like where they have tilts and masks that are sort of like this blend between that, like, you know, life is a mask, life is a show, life is, you know, this theatrical spectacle.
Illusions, or
yeah.
maybe kind of Gnostic-y in a sense too.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know
Yeah.
if the reading's proper or not, but
like, yeah, all the sacred geometry that's coming through Vitruvius, that's like Pythagorean in the first place. So like, in this weird way, like, so much of the Renaissance is like Pythagoras, and yeah, who'd have known?
I'll come back to Soltron, one of our faithful commenters, but here's one more little good summary, and we need to give Chance like a red flag that he can always raise anytime I'm reading stuff like this, and like, I object. And for our usual audience and the people that we usually keep an eye out for, and why we do so. But here we go. A good summary here of some of the work. Let us emphasize again the two significant dates. Dee's preface to Euclid, John Dee's preface to Euclid, was published in 1570. James Burbage erected his theater in 1576. During those 6 years, the preface in Euclid had been disseminating a new enthusiasm among common artificers, showing them new practical applications of the geometry and mathematics which they knew from their practical experience, new meanings in it, and opening up a new vision of ancient architecture as the queen of all the sciences. It is within this fermenting movement that we should, I believe, see James Burbage, joiner and player, who wants to build a theater. Inevitably, he would want the theater to be something like an ancient theater, and we have seen that the English theaters made the impression on contemporaries of being something like ancient theaters. In spite of their evidence, there had been a tendency to continue to think of Elizabethan theaters as somehow evolved among players who could have known very little or nothing of the learned revival of the Vitruvian theater in exclusive academic groups on the continent of Europe. This book's a little old, so maybe the thought's outdated now. But this difficulty is now completely resolved by the study of Dee's propagation of Vitruvian influences amongst just that class of men to which Burbage belonged. The emergence of Burbage's theater in 1576 would be the result both of the popular acting movement, the increasing popular appeal of which made the actors think of providing themselves with a permanent theater on a commercial basis, for better maintaining of their own estate, as Dee might put it, and of the Vitruvian movement popularized by Dee. So yeah, she's trying to say, that there's like this new middle class, sort of bursting on the scene, trying to wield all this, new public knowledge, essentially.
Right.
And specifically because Dee, in his little prefaces, does happen to kind of quote stuff, not just from Vitruvius, but some of the specific stuff that Vitruvius has to say about theaters, which is not a whole lot. Usually he's always talking about temples and that kind of thing.
Right.
But in this one little part, he does talk about theaters. That's some of the stuff that Dee does quote, which is sort of relevant to the whole scene that that we're kind of talking about here.
Okay.
And here's the next little part. And within the sphere of patronage, so important an aspect of Renaissance effort, a connection might be perceived between John Dee and the building of James Burbage's theater. The company of players for whom Burbage's theater was built was under the protection of Robert, Earl of Leicester. This did not involve any financial assistance. The players paid their own way, maybe, but this protection was most necessary for them as a defense against the animosity of the civic authorities and the Puritans, which were constantly being brought to bear upon them in attempts to interfere with their efforts. Leicester was himself a leader of the Puritan party, and as such might have been expected to share in its animosity to the stage. Yet he encouraged his company of players, thereby earning rebuke from a Puritan divine, John Field, in the letter of 1581, where this guy is saying, "Oh, Leicester, don't do it." I guess. I'll read it. The more Satan rageth, the more volunteer be you, understandard of him who will not be foiled. And I humbly beseech you, your honor, to take heed how you give your hand, either in evil causes or in the behalf of evil men, as if late you did for players, to the great grief of all the godly. Leicester's double-faced attitude of giving public support to the dominant Puritan party, whilst at the same time encouraging activities, like the drama, to which it was strongly averse, is a characteristic of the age and of the Queen's own policies. When Burbage raised in 1576 that wicked pagan theatre, so like the old theatre at Rome, Leicester's powerful protection of his company of players was an important element in the success of the enterprise, which otherwise might have floundered under the attacks of the Puritan preachers and their enemies. And then she also reminds us how Leicester is also connected to John Dee, which we've gone over at length in the Magus and the Muse episode, and how we were obviously interested in connecting John Dee and Philip Sidney, and well, were they not ever more connected. So,
and like, I don't know, this whole phenomenon of being for and against something, it's hard to like contextualize that. Like, it, you know, we have such this tendency to like reduce and simplify what happens in history, and so when you read a textual thing, it's like, oh, this thing's against this policy, and so was against this policy. It must, you know, this text must be backing up this. But like, it gets so much more complicated when the person behind it was like both for and against something, and it gets even more complicated with some of these texts that like you could make an argument both ways. And,
right.
And so trying to like contextualize like what is the ultimate end goal of this, you know, propaganda, if we want to make that sort of like Frankfurt School Marxist reading, that like this is some elitist propaganda that's coming from big money that's trying to sway society in a certain way. Like, what is it that they're trying to do? Like, trying to unravel that, like, I think is why this is such a difficult issue, you know? Like, Shakespeare himself, like, or themself or herself, so many people have said, "Oh, Shakespeare's a Catholic," and then some people, "No, right. Shakespeare's a Puritan." And
he's a Republican, or he's a monarch, or any sort of thing. Yeah, he's an imperialist.
Yeah, he's an anarchist.
No, he's a free-loving guy. Yeah. No, he's an authoritarian.
Yeah, Shakespeare's homosexual.
That multiplicity reading, which we sort of kind of touched on before, you know.
Right.
So,
and like, I don't know, even Marlowe, like we talked about it in our last video, that like, Stephanie Hopkins Hughes was saying Marlowe, you know, is totally this voice of the common man, and it's like, have you read Marlowe? like yes, Tamburlaine is technically just a shepherd at the start, but like very quickly into the story, that's not how you would describe Tamburlaine. But very quickly, he is the emperor of the world, and like, that's not the common man anymore. And what Tamburlaine does with it, like, if you want to say that he's the common man, well, at the end of the day, like, that's his fault. And so, like, why would that be a good thing, you know? I'm reading at Edward II now, and, like, Gaveston, everybody hates Gaveston, and people hate Gaveston because he's gay, but people also hate Gaveston because he's not this noble like the rest of the folks, you know. He's not like Lancaster and Mortimer that are, you know, noble.
Fine,
that they're real, they're earls and they're aristocrats. Gaveston's just some French guy that the king's propping up, and it's like, you know, Gaveston is powerful, and Gaveston's like the big force of change in the story, but like, you know, anybody that wants to say that Marlowe's this gay guy that's the voice of the common man, then why does he write himself as the loser in all of his stories? You know, like, I don't know that we're supposed to necessarily root for Gaveston or like Gaveston. It's a fun William Blake type reading, but I don't know. But I can still sort of see that argument that, like, no, underneath it all, yes, you're supposed to really empathize with Gaveston, but no, that's like, so I don't know, like, it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and we've definitely touched on that before. Yeah, and that sort of goes a little bit, not, you know, maybe not quite, but into the, you know, who did the best Shakespeare, or the Macbeth soliloquy, and yeah, just that multiple readings about, you know, where to stress what, and like where do those inflections carry to different meanings sometimes, you know. I don't know. It's
which this is maybe totally silly and I shouldn't bring it up, but I've been thinking about it, that I was reading Sejanus, and it makes a pun, and I totally forgot that the word nothing is a pun for like female genitalia, and so like signifying nothing, it's like that. It's like the True Detective quote: "Everything's sex." You know? So like it's all sound and fury signifying nothing. Like I don't know. Maybe that's too much of a stretch. Maybe that's not one of these times where we read nothing. But like maybe there could be some irony there, and maybe we're missing it and everybody's making this soliloquy way too serious.
Yeah.
I don't know. Food for thought. I think I'm probably stretching it, and that's a bad reading. But just hadn't thought about that. I had another thought on that, but we'll come back to it. Ian and I, my buddy Ian, who is a big theater Broadway fan, who's got his own YouTube channel, which I've linked before, which possibly will have him on the show here in like a week or two, if we can fit it in. I'd like to do a little theater then and now sort of thing. But he and I were getting not quite into an argument, but he was really trying to say like, yo, like not only was Kenneth Branagh's like probably the best on the little thing you showed, like he was saying like Kenneth Branagh's like that little clip was one of the best pieces of theater acting he's seen. And it's like, okay, but he was trying to like tell me that like why it's gonna look silly if you're looking for film acting, like because what he's doing should be like pitching out to the nosebleeds.
Yeah.
What he's doing.
And we
should,
gave that caveat. It's like, all right, fair. Yeah, we shouldn't. Quite compare.
Yeah.
Maybe in the full fair category. But
he also pointed out that like in that video, I mentioned that like, yo, out brief candle. That's an imperative statement, and it's got exclamation marks in the text. Kenneth Branagh was the only one that said it as such. Everybody else is
out.
Yeah,
whispery.
out, brief candle.
Yeah.
And like Kenneth Branagh, out, brief candle. Sorry, Ian. That said, like, yeah, I don't know. It's like you're saying, there's this multiplicitous thing that it's not settling for me because I want it to be serious and I want it to be comical. I want it to be ironic, and like I want Macbeth to be like in this.
I want it to be whimpering. I want him to be shouting. I want it to be snarling. I want it to be.
He's been losing his mind since at least Act 3, if not earlier. Probably since Act 2 or more. Like he's been losing his freaking gourd. Like and like a lot of people, pretty much all those people showed us this like moment of clarity, and it's like I see that compulsion to show it like that, but at the same time, like I also want people to show like. No, this is when he should be losing it all together. Like, this is like he's already been going nuts. This is like the permanent unraveling. This is the point of no return. This isn't a moment of clarity.
Yeah. It shouldn't be quite so mic droppy. It should be a little more like cringy or something.
Yeah,
like that,
it's like if you've ever like been around a friend or anything that has like any kind of anxiety disorder or bipolar stuff or anything like that, where they get in this like fit or this tizzy or I teach kids, so I see it, but like they start putting themselves and they just start vocalizing, and like that's to me what's happening in that monologue. And so like it's not this thing that she should have died hereafter. Like you're telling some people, like a crowd's listening to you. No, it's like you're telling it to yourself and you're vocalizing and you're antic, and like that's what I think it really should be. And nobody quite has done that. So we'll see. I don't know. There's another Macbeth out right now over in London, starring David Tennant.
Not Daniel Craig.
That was the one on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
But the one in London is starring David Tennant's the guy from Doctor Who.
Right, yeah. And he's the one who plays Hamlet in one of those other renditions of it, I think.
I was all hyped because I was mixing him up with David Dawson. And I was like, dude, David Tennant's doing this? And it's like, turns out that's not the same guy as David Dawson, though they look very similar. David Dawson's King Alfred in The Last Kingdom.
Okay.
And he is also a
okay.
Shakespearean actor. He's in the BBC Hollow Crown series, and he plays Poins, who is like Henry V's best friend. So he's in the Henry IV and Henry V plays. And getting to see David Dawson next to Tom Hiddleston, it's like, yeah, dude, this is quality, man. Like, yeah, this is top notch freaking acting. I've not really watched Doctor Who. I have no idea if David Tennant's any good or not. I watched like a little bit of Sherlock, and that was about as much as I could do for BBC television. So I never got into Doctor Who. Maybe my loss, but okay. You'd think that Brady and I'd be into it. It's totally like, our kind of thing. But
so my mom loves. My mom really likes it.
All right, well, I don't know. Then it's probably like that. What was that one movie she likes? Frequency.
Yeah.
It's maybe like that, which the movie's kind of cool. It's not as good as like The Matrix or Pleasantville or something, but
I mean, no.
No, it's not.
No, I'm saying I don't think I like Pleasantville as much. But.
Oh, really? One of the first years I was teaching, I showed that to my 7th grade class because it was like raining and they were supposed to do something outside and they couldn't. So
you showed them Pleasantville.
I thought it was. I watched it when I was like, shout out to my mom, but totally had forgotten that movie's all about like burgeoning sexuality of like the American middle class, and yeah, it totally has a scene of like an old lady masturbating in a bathtub, and like showed that to like some 13-year-old like disadvantaged youth, and like it was artistic. Thin ice from there. We didn't let Mr. Colbert pick any more movies after that. But I don't know. They liked it sans that scene. I think some of the kids may have liked that scene. So, I don't know. Pleasant. All those movies are just bad. Philip K. Dick is really what it is. Like Frequency, Equilibrium, any of those like late '90s Truman Show, Pleasantville, The Matrix, Dark City. Like there's a lot of them. But the Minority Report. Minority Report actually is Philip K. Dick, but like it's.
Did you say Equilibrium already?
Yeah,
okay.
But yeah, like it's all watered down Philip K. Dick. So, which shout out guys, go read your Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, we should do an episode on some Philip K. Dick at some point. So,
yeah,
I mean, I imagine that people would be doing lots of book reviews on it, but maybe they're not. I don't know. I mean, it's one author that I haven't gone and seen. I know people will definitely pay homage to him, and
he's got his cult following.
Yeah. But I don't know. Like the time out of joint, and shout out to Ian again for bringing this book back up.
Yeah.
You telling me about the plot of that, and it's like, oh man, that's a real mind melter.
Yeah, man. In which that's the book that both Truman Show and Pleasantville like have had accusations of stealing from that book.
Yeah. Oh, from that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Here, may show me one last little quote here, and this is maybe this will lead into some of the other topics we have here, but she's kind of going into some more of this history of the plays, and then she introduces this character Inigo Jones, and then there's this part in the theater history where they start adding more of this spectacle into it, more of the stage props and scene transitions, and she'll talk about Ben Jonson apparently, saying that how he doesn't like that kind of stuff or whatnot.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes. That's good. Yeah.
But here, when she's talking about the Vitruvian Theater, which is what supposedly the original globe and all this sort of stuff is supposed to be based on, all this sacred geometry built into it. She kind of goes into the Vitruvian Theater, and she says here literally, the Vitruvian Theater is most emphatically an actor's theater, not a scene painter's theater. And so there is this whole emphasis on being able to, and that's the whole point of the sacred geometry and the design of the theater, is to get the voice to the best possible quality.
Acoustics,
to all these people in it. So this whole paragraph she'll say, What is certain, however, is that the changing scenes, with their appeal to the spectator's sense of sight, play a very minor part in Vitruvius's account of the Roman theater. The whole emphasis of his account is on sound, and on the voices of the players, and how every word they speak must be audible, on the music of their voices to be emphasized and brought out into volumes of harmonious sound through knowledge of acoustics and musical theory, and through the sounding vessels, which are given much more lengthy treatment than the scenes. And so yeah, she kind of makes an argument that at some point more of these plays start implementing more of that stuff. You start to see less emphasis on the actor stuff, and like I was maybe pitching to you, that's why people have said, oh, some of that later Shakespeare stuff, is not as good. Maybe there's less emphasis on the dialogue because they're doing more spectacle, more eye candy
which
stuff.
is totally unbelievably relevant to now, right? Like that.
What did you call it? Like in how
the
Marvel movie.
the Marvelization of
less on characters and just more green screen. Just, kind of
get the blue light filter in, get the sound effects, get the zoom ins, the zoom outs, make sure to have the flash and the.
They got their formula, and not to say that any of the Marvel movies were some kind of highfalutin, dialogue or whatever.
To be fair, this movement towards spectacle predates Marvel, and Marvel's just like the exemplar of it at the peak of this spectacle priority. But this movement towards spectacle was happening back in the 2000s, or the 90s even. It's like. It starts all the way back in the early 90s when Terminator 2 blows all the other movies out of the water, and it's like, wait, movies can make this much money? And then 2 or 3 years later, that's doubled by Jurassic Park, and then 2 or 3 years later, that's doubled by Titanic, and then a decade later, that's doubled by Avatar, and that's been the goal ever since. And I don't think, hopefully, God bless, I hope that doesn't double again. I hope we've hit a wall here, but every one of those movies that I listed is worse than the one before it. Just about. I know people may argue Jurassic Park versus Terminator, but these are movies that are made by artistic filmmakers, but at some point it's less and less about the art of the story and the art
it's more
of
about
the thought.
technical achievements that they've brought forward.
It's like how to wow in a spectacle.
Yeah, for real. Because Avatar, people would not talk about how great of a it's of a story. It's not so deep.
Right.
It's just Dances with Wolves all over again, right?
Right.
But
it's Pocahontas. Yeah.
Yeah, but just giant blue.
Yeah, Dances with Smurfs, as South Park said. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
now it's coming, and since that movie, they've obviously gotten a lot better in implementing that technology, and so some people have they're accustomed to at least seeing that sort of thing. But people are like, oh well, it looks cool, because I know enough people like that will be able to write it off and at least have a good time. Where you and I will claw our eyes out trying to this scene's so dumb, it's these lines.
I am
characters.
super partial to 60s and 70s film, and once you get into the 80s and 90s, this tendency towards spectacle starts to grow, and it's freaking George Lucas and Star Wars' fault. It's Steven Spielberg's fault. It's James Cameron's fault. But if you go back into the 70s, movies I don't know, the Sting with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, it's just a well written movie. Network, Chinatown, there's spectacle in it, sure, but the spectacle is shot composition.
It's serving a purpose, not losing the forest for the trees.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
And I don't know, to me,
the other way around.
Either way, to me that's still the height of film. There are some select great movies from the 90s, 2000s, and maybe even after that are able to have that quality writing and maybe add some spectacle to it. But far and away the priority became spectacle, and we're at where we're at, where it's I don't even pay attention to the modern films. I loved Chris Nolan growing up, but I didn't go see Oppenheimer. I don't.
Dude, I was not interested.
Yeah,
but I will say, what movie I will say? The Northman. Shout out, Because, and what's great is that a lot of the people that I know that did go see that movie, if you watch a trailer, you think it's going to be some rough and tough,
right.
hyper masculine Viking movie. But it's really not like that.
No,
it's a lot more subdued and a lot more slow burn. And
right.
like, oh my god, I love that movie so much.
Like, well,
shout out to Shakespeare and the whole Amleth connection to that too. But that's the thing, is that so many people, like my uncle was like, oh, I didn't get it. My other brother-in-law and my father-in-law, they're like, oh, we didn't really get it. We couldn't finish it. And I was like, dude, this movie's so good. Like,
I thought the A24 Gawain movie was pretty cool too. Like,
I haven't seen that, but I really need to. But yeah, it looks right up my alley. Just like the 2015 A24 Macbeth one. Yeah, that trailer, they just killed that trailer. The distorted violence. It's so good.
But while you were reading that and talking about the sound and this movement from the Vitruvian aural actors stage to this more spectacle Inigo Jones type stage, like we were just talking about the Macbeth soliloquy. And that Macbeth soliloquy is going to be 1605 or 6 or 7. Like, that's right at that Ben Jonson, Inigo Jones, like, spectacle verse, like, and what's he say? Like, a poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying, like, full of sound and fury, like, yeah, because they're in a stage or a theater that's not built for an actor to emit and have good acoustics. So they're in this studio that's made to, show off Inigo Jones's little paintings and stuff. But this poor, actor's out there strutting and fretting. Nobody can hear him. Who's heard no more. Like,
Dang, yeah.
So I don't know. Like that just while you were saying that, I was like, wait a second, I've heard this before. Like, So yeah, it's interesting. And like, if it was a different play, sure, but like that one like situates right there chronologically speaking, and like that's kind of the last of, or right at the end of the great dialogue Shakespeare's before we take this dive into Tempest and Afterland, where it's all this stuff.
So yeah, Chance is recently telling me that he was reading Cymbeline, and he managed to get through most of some of it.
I've heard Harold Bloom hype up some of the characters in here, like Imogen. Harold Bloom really likes Imogen.
Maybe there's good name real estate at least, like there's good names to repurpose, but other than that.
But it's all so stale. It's all so bland. Like, there's no good lines. Like, there's no moment where it's like, man, that character's... This is like the opposite of Timon of Athens. Like, and I don't know, the plot's like not super grabbing me either, and...
It seemed, when I kind of went through a brief Wikipedia summary of it, it definitely kind of seemed like a giant sitcom, more serious sitcom episode, because you got this whole kind of like relationship subplot or main plot going on top of this bigger geopolitical plot happening at the same time. It kind of seemed really haphazard, and I think that there's a more modern movie rendition of it.
Yeah.
Ethan Hawke is in it. He's also in The Northman, but
Ethan Hawke's in a lot of stuff. Is he in the Marvel universe? You can't say no, like,
Yeah, I wouldn't take that bet, but I'm just... He's not Hawkman? I don't know. That's the same guy, right?
I bet he's in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, he's got to be somebody. He's got to be somebody.
It sounds right. Like, I don't think I could do that with any other actor, by the way. Like, just... I could either definitively say yes or no, but, like, Ethan Hawke? I don't know. Could be. I don't think I'm going to find a good example of how bad this play is just by scrolling through it, but...
It's going to hurt your eyes.
But yeah, like, I don't know. It's like it just feels so stock play in so many cases, where it's just like the characters are like exposition dumping and it's not even like in this cool way. Like that happens in The Tempest. Like Prospero does this giant exposition dump, but it's like this cool story with, you know, this poetic telling. Like this, it's just like, your father is angry at you because blah blah blah, and then the other character's like, I don't like my father because blah blah blah, and it's like, oh, like you, why are you saying that to each other? Like just say it to us at some point. Like, and so yeah, I don't know, Kimberling, not too great. I realized Signet Classics did something here. They took all the worst Shakespeare plays and put them in one book. Because when I got tired of Kimberlin, I was like, screw it, let me go read Pericles. And I was like, sometimes, you know, when you read two things at the same time, they start to blend together. Like, I had a hard time because I was reading Pericles and I was like, is this not Kimberlin? Like, is this not the same play? And they're all these kind of Greekish names anyway. We got Imogen and Iachimo and Cloten and Posthumus and Pisano, and the other one we got Tyrion and Lysimachus and Marina, and none of these names are sticking, you know. And
do Oxfordians like claiming these plays, or they're like, oh yeah, maybe it's,
generally speaking, like,
or they're like, oh, that's when he wrote, honestly, when he was like 2 or 3 or something.
Yeah, like honestly, like that's one of the things that like led me to Oxfordian, you know, theory, was just that like the standard rote belief behind this is like that, yeah, Shakespeare's like writing his best plays ever, like Coriolanus and King Lear, and then, you know, starts to experiment with something like The Tempest, and then these, and it's like, wait, did he have a stroke?
Yeah, the most generic.
Which, if you look at the signatures, maybe he did have a stroke. Like, but at some point they need to start saying something like that. Like, and you know, they'll say like, oh no, he's co-writing some of these, and it's like, some, like, what about the ones he's not co-writing? Because they're like, yeah, they say George Wilkins helped write this, and they say Fletcher helped write this, but what about Kimberlin? Why is Kimberlin so bad? They don't have an answer for that, and so at least Oxfordians are like, well, it's not good because, yeah, that was written back in the 60s or 70s. That's early days, like back when people were barely writing plays, and Oxford was young, and he touched it up a little bit, but not much, and he died, and so they decided to throw it in because it's one of his plays, but like, it, you know, it wasn't one of the heyday Shakespeare plays. It was probably one of the Oxford heyday plays that he tried to touch up and never got fully done, but they still threw it in because, you know, his daughter helped compile the folio and blah blah blah. So like, I can empathize with that, but like, at some point, why are these being put in the stationer's registry in 1608, 1609? Why are they being drummed up again? So like, that's the problem, is Stratfordians date it to when they do because there's external evidence to say this is when it should be dating, but the internal stuff in the play says, whoa, no, this is early. And so Oxfordians say, oh yeah, it's an early play, and Stratfordians say, no, it's a late play. And like, clearly it's probably written early and then dug up again, but like, why are these ones that are dug up again such crap? Because they're not getting work.
Please don't dig them up, yeah.
Yeah, they're not getting, in like, you know, it's fair to say that like a lot of the ones that are our best plays ever started out crap, but they got reworked, and they got really, like, why are we not getting like the 1600 era level quality with some of these 1610 era plays? Like, why do we get this big kind of drop off around 1610 to 1620? And like, that totally is the case. Like, Ben Jonson's best stuff's probably done by then. Shakespeare's best stuff's done by then. Most of those Henslowe names are gone. Decker's in jail for most of those years. So it's like, you know, something changes around then. And so I like your Francis Yates spectacle thing. I don't know that it answers everything, but sort of helps a little bit.
Yeah, just trying to take into account all the workings, you know, in the scene to try to figure out what is the most parsimonious answer. You know?
Yeah. Honestly, it's not really till John Ford pops on the scene. But yeah, even Marston's best stuff, Webster's best stuff, like they're all kind of done by the early 16 teens, and so it's an interesting thing. Yeah, Sans, Ford, and Massinger. There's not much late stuff that's worthwhile.
I've been to a recreation of the Globe Theater.
Okay.
In Asheville, Oregon?
Okay.
I think that's where it is. So my dad's aunt lives there. Shout out Aunt Peggy. But she was like an actress or something in the whole... I don't know if she was like in Hollywood, but she was definitely some sort of stage actress, and so she like was kind of involved with the scene. But yeah, they have some mini Globe Theater.
Okay.
That's there. But they didn't have like rafters up on the side. It must be... Because we were definitely like on the platform level, where obviously in this picture here they can kind of have like the stadium seatings that rise up into the air or whatever. But yeah, we were definitely like down here in this like where none of this stuff was here, but they apparently it's known as being they have some kind of Shakespeare festival there all the time or whatever.
We'll have to like attend one year.
Yeah, right. We watched. What's the one with the two twins that are separated at birth? A Comedy of Errors? Or is it...
So, like, yes.
There's one with, like, two twins are separated at birth and they somehow end up all in the same place. So we watched... It was, like, a Western retelling of that. And that was... I remember that being funny. That was the second night of something we watched. And then the first night... It was some other more modern play, I want to say, something like that, and I was just really drab and boring, and I was like, I don't really care for this. But the next night, they're like, okay, they're doing Shakespeare this time, so I was like, all right, well, and I was like in a sophomore in high school, and so that was my first time actually seeing some kind of company put on some kind of Shakespeare stuff, and so it was Shakespeare, but like I said, the veneer of a Western sort of backdrop or whatever. But I remember finding it highly entertaining, and I was like, oh wow, this is like really funny, and like this was great or whatever, so. Yeah, that definitely had an impression on me.
Man.
But, Globe Theater, Asheville, Nash, Ash.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
I'll get it in somehow. Speaking of the whole Pythagoras thing, and once again, I guess Sultron's just going to get all the shout-outs tonight. We've mentioned it multiple times, but he put us onto this book, The Touches of Sweet Harmony, and I'll read you the blurb. The notion of a harmonious universe was taught by Pythagoras as early as the 6th century BC and remained a basic premise in Western philosophy, science, and art almost to our own day. And Touches of Sweet Harmony, S.K. Heininger first recounts the legendary life of Pythagoras, describes his school at Croton, and discusses the materials in which the Renaissance drew its information about Pythagorean doctrine. The second section of the book reconstructs the many facets of this doctrine, and the final section shows its influence on Renaissance poetics. Individual chapters treat the assumption that the poet is a maker acting in likeness of creating Godhead. The metaphor depends upon correspondences between various levels of creation, and that the poem serves as a microcosm in literary form. Oh, that's a lot more heady than I thought. I remember reading that. Here, there's a little more here, and here's where we'll change we'll raise his flag. The idea of cosmos, expressed as universal harmony, or as a tetrad, was prominent in the Renaissance period and strongly conditioned in aesthetics. Therefore, the author expresses his conviction that unless we accept the viability of a divinely ordered universe, as did the 16th century poet, we shall misinterpret much of the best writing in our language, and much of the meaning of Elizabethan verse will be lost. Professor Heininger's magisterial work introduces the reader not only to Pythagoras, but to a host of other classical, medieval, and Renaissance figures as well, from Plato and Aristotle through St. Augustine and Macrobius down to Sidney and Spencer.
All right.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there, but we've already talked about, because Sidney kind of already talked about the poet being the maker in the Defense of Poesy essay that we've gone through in 2 parts now. But yeah, that the assumption that the poet is a maker acting in likeness of creating Godhead, which is like, oh no, like,
yeah,
and we've kind of gone on with this whole empire language sort of, feedback, intertwinedness or something like that. So yeah, and how much obviously people are passionate not just about discussing the Shakespeare authorship question, but because it is so prominent in our language, and it has, it is such a facet of it. So it in of itself is sort of its own sort of godhead that we can't even question it sometimes, literally. So like I don't know how to fully explicate all the I don't know what it is to the.
Well, like at some point it reminds me of we've brought him up once or twice. Stan Tenen.
Yes.
Stan Tenen is a Kabbalist, Jewish thinker who talks a lot about the Jewish alphabet or the Hebrew alphabet, but specifically, or not just specifically the Hebrew alphabet, but he talks generally about sacred alphabets, and that like
because he says Greek is one of those same flavors.
Yeah, and that there's a certain numerological aspect to it, and that there's geometrical aspects to it, and that it's psychologically, hermetically, like ingrained into the thinking and culture of the people, and that like that's why it's ordered the way it is. That's why it takes the shapes and sounds the way they do, and it just seems to me that like what Touch of Sweet Harmony is getting at is that like there's a conscious effort throughout Western history to kind of do that with whatever language and thought people are working with, and it works its way up into the English language, and that like specifically people like Sidney and Spencer are making a very conscious effort to like sacredify or sanctify the language, to turn it into something sacred that has the same kind of power as Hebrew, Phoenician, Egyptian, Greek, these classical languages. And like, why? Well, I think that it goes back into our empire and language, that sort of thing. But like, specifically idiosyncratically, like why would each person be doing it? Well, Sidney, he's trying to, syncretically tie together a group of people to unite them to make a wider and wider body, whether it's a nation state or
trading, commercial state too, or something,
or religious affiliations.
Yep.
So, what can help do that is making this sort of sacred language, which not to toot our own English horns, but like, man, everybody's speaking English right now. Like everybody, like Korea, it's the lingua franca, like. Korea, that's the opposite side of the earth. Like, do you know what the largest
shout out, I'm Korean, by the way.
Do you know what the largest speaking English city in the world is?
The largest speaking English city?
The largest English speaking city.
Oh, what is it?
Guess a continent.
Oh, is it in Asia?
Nope.
Is it in Africa?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, it's like South Africa or something.
It's not even South Africa. It's Lagos, Nigeria.
Oh, okay.
It has like 25 million people, and English is their number one language. That said, is it English that you and I speak, or that Shakespeare spoke? No, it's
Pidgin English.
It's own kind of specific
pejorative
Nigeria. I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but it's its own form of Nigerian Pidgin. But it's still English. It's still the root of it all is English. You can call it some Creole or Pidgin language, but it's English, and so like every continent, it's dominated. Like the English vocabulary is twice the size of any other language.
Yeah, something about its adaptability, or because that's what they sort of did in this period is like, okay, like it is so adaptable because it's like it's stealing German, it's stealing Latin, it's stealing French, it's using Italian, it's using old, Greek, probably Old Hebrew, Norse and Greek, and Old English as well. And so it's managed to make a system that can incorporate and sort of be like the Borg or something like that. They can kind of assimilate other things. And we need a new word. Oh well, here we have a whole
it's
system
the ultimate form of Westernism.
Right.
You just co-opt and turn it into the machine.
Amazing.
Yeah, like
And maybe there's because I know they kind of touch on the harmony and music is very much also sort of on the forefront of their mind, and how all that musical theory kind of works out. But how much of that, when I think about Old English, or when you read some of that old stuff, or when I try to read some of this Old Norse stuff, there is that more of like kind of, dare I say, like elvish, sort of much more mellifluous, sing-songy sort of aspect to those old ways of speaking, where I would imagine that if you our language today, even not even that long ago, but obviously go back way further to maybe pre-Christianized people or even early Christian people. I feel like the syntax of it just sounds so robotic and so surgical. So
English is the least sing-songy, like modern English is the least sing-songy language that has ever been spoken, as far as I can tell. Every other language has like.
Even French is like, oh, je m'appelle. There's a sort of natural cadence, which
shout out to Ian, who's fluent in French, and like when Ian goes and visits France and then comes back, like he'll still have some of the French expressions, and he'll do a lot of they just make noises, and it's like, you can't just make noises in English, like and
sir, I think you're violating my rights.
And like
noises.
If you go onto YouTube and go look at the history of English, like there's one guy that writes the same paragraph, and goes all the way back to like Proto-Hydromanic from like 2,500 years ago, and then does like every 400 or 500 years all the way up till now, and like when it starts out, stuff sounds like Latin or Greek or Spanish. It's got all these vowels at the end that it's got the da 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 da, like it's like, what is this? And then as it goes on, like it's pretty much, where does that stop? Modern English. Well, where's modern English? Shakespeare's era, and like specifically like right at Shakespeare. If you go any earlier, they still have the same words, but like go read Thomas Wyatt or Henry Howard, who were like 1520s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Like it's still like they're pronouncing words like son, sona, and like they're pronouncing words like pretty, pretty, or prettier, or they're still doing like nation would be nation, and like that. You can't say that now, 'cause like it's too sing-songy. It's too. You sound like a foreigner. Like not to be derogatory, but like that's what nation. Like no, like it's nation.
It doesn't sound like you got the, as the Germans would call it, like the Sprachgefühl, which is like the innate captured. It would it would obviously sound like, you've obviously got some of the mechanics of like how that would make that sound, but there's something more quick about how we've kind of processed it now.
Right.
I wonder if there's anything about theories about the new way that they make the rhymes and the verses kind of attempts to tamper down some of that stuff, or something like that, right? Like kind of provide new syntax and cadence, new forms or whatever.
What words are picked to be the end rhymes and which ones aren't?
Right.
Yeah. And like also like
Sydney's like, I hate it when they say this word this way. We're gonna I don't know, something goofy.
There may be examples of that, like
it reminds me of the Rick and Morty. There's a Rick and Morty bit where they, the top universe or something like that, and they're like, "Well, what's wrong with this one, Rick?" And he's like, "Well, they pronounce Parmesan here," and they're like, "No, we can't do it." So it reminds me of that.
I can't think off the top of my head, but there's like some words that we have as adverbs now that were slightly different back then. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but like I don't know, just similar to how people now use the word supposedly and supposively interchangeably, like there's examples of that. So maybe maybe something like that. But here, let me check over our notes real quick. At some point, I do want to do a sequel video to our Handy video. Our Handy video is going over Carol Chillington's essay that says, hey, wait a second. we've only pitched Shakespeare's hand D. Nobody ever bothered to look anywhere else. John Webster matches up really well, and it may make more sense than Shakespeare. She doesn't say for certain that it's 100% Webster and 100% not Shakespeare. She just goes out and says, hey, can we consider Webster as a possible candidate too?
People did not respond kindly, did they?
No.
It's like a whole book of people like ganged up on her.
It's an entire book, a book like this. Each one's an essay that's basically just saying why Carol Chillington's wrong, which actually it's not totally true. There's about half of them are doing that. The other half are just talking about it and may or may not take a few sentences to say Carol Chillington's wrong, but there are several that are like just flat out like, I'm here to refute what Carol Chillington's saying. But that said, it is actually a pretty cool book because each essay is kind of approaching the matter in a different way. Some are looking at like the textual stylistic evidence. Some are looking at like repertory stuff. So like, what would the acting company have been playing at that time or at different times? Where would it, other people are like trying to do external stuff like, there's the big riot scene. So who would be rioting and when would the riot been happening? And, is this part of the Essex Rebellion stuff or is this part of the foreign riots in the early 90s? Like, when's this happening? And then, so there's a lot of essays that are doing some cool stuff. That said, like, to me, none of it discounts what Chillington's saying. Some of them make some good arguments for saying, hey, look, Shakespeare's definitely not discounted. We just don't have a great way of explaining how he gets his hand on the play or why he gets his hand on the play. But, like, it's completely possible that this is happening in the 1600s and that it gets passed over to him for whatever reason. We don't know why or how, but it's possible it could have. Or that this is a early 90s play and he would have been the guy to do it anyway. And so they're saying these are still possible, even though Carol Chillington pointed out that neither of those seem probable. And I think that that's a totally valid point. That said, I still feel like Carol Chillington's points are stronger than any of theirs. And so I still feel like Webster's still maybe a better candidate, but I'm up for the idea that a different writer as Shakespeare could do it. That said, you and I know that our belief is that Webster is the handy hand of Shakespeare, and that if you bound up hand A through E and put it all in print, we would just call that a Shakespeare. We wouldn't separate it into a bunch of them, but the material that is represented by hand D, that's the Webster hand in Shakespeare. That's the one doing the Mark Antony speech and Julius Caesar. So I do want to do a video going over some of those essays and saying, here's their good points, here's where they're not really answering Chillington, and here's where maybe some of what we're saying can answer how Webster is handy in doing it. And so, stuff like that. And so, yeah, I do want to do a sequel video to Handy. Maybe also revisit Henslowe. One more thing I want to mention before we signed out was when we were talking about Drayton, Thomas Pavier, what I failed to mention is that, like, people have suggested that some of these Shakespeare Apocrypha plays are clearly Shakespeare, they just didn't get put in the folio because of censorship reasons. So, plays like Edward III made fun of Scots, so didn't get put in the folio, right? And also, at some point, the folio was clearly doing some numerical thing where it had 36 plays even. But those two plays that were mentioned, Sir John Oldcastle and Yorkshire Tragedy, that are printed by Shakespeare, or printed as by Shakespeare, that get printed in the false folio or whatever, those both happen to be about people related to this guy named Lord Cobham. So, Sir John Oldcastle was the original name of the character for Falstaff, and this family didn't like it, and they had to change the name. The family that didn't like it were the Brookes, the Cobhams. They're not the Earl, the Baron of Cobham, or the Lords of Cobham, but their last name's Brooke. So they're the ones that wanted that changed. Well, Yorkshire Tragedy is based on this guy named Walter Caverley who kills his family. Walter Caverley is basically the adopted foster son of Lord Cobham. And so at some point I wonder if those aren't included in the folio, not because they're not Shakespeare, but because of censorship reasons. And so there may be something to that. It may not be that Thomas Pavier is just putting names on these things to make a buck. Maybe that he's putting the name that he's supposed to put on, we just don't include it later because, like many of the Shakespeare Apocrypha, it's censored out. But like all these Shakespeare Apocrypha along with the folio plays add up to 50, 60 something plays. At some point it's not all one guy. And so trying to make these attributions based on the idea that it's one guy isn't going to get us anywhere. So yeah, I wanted to tie that all the way back in. But I think we can call it there. I wanted to talk about some of the plays I've been reading, but we'll save it for another video. Read The Tempest, read Midsummer Night's Dream, read King John, read Sejanus by Ben Jonson, which apparently may be co-written by Shakespeare. And Ben Jonson says that it was co-written by somebody. He didn't say who, but he said he edited all their stuff out. Yet there are tons of lines in here that's like, well, that reads just like Shakespeare. So makes me think, like, anytime we hear Ben Jonson say something, don't listen to him. Like, yeah, it's only me. I edited out the other guy. That means he didn't edit out the other guy, and it's totally the other guy in there. Furthermore, when this was printed, it was printed with some prefatory poems, one by John Marston, one by George Chapman, but one by a Cygnus, and Cygnus is the Latin word for swan, and so people have speculated that that's the Sweet Swan of Avon, Shakespeare. There was another poem right after Cygnus. It's written by a Philos, or Philos, yeah, love. And, you know, me and you, we see that word Phil, and it's like, okay, alright. But I was reading an essay suggesting that Philos was none other than Walter Raleigh. And it was going into a bunch of Platonic and Socratic philosophy, specifically Gorgian philosophy. There's this philosopher named Gorgias, and he was like the second best philosopher at the time of Socrates. And he was like the one that Socrates would really... Isn't
there a play, or there's a play called Gorgias,
yes,
or whatever? Yeah, it's like them debating or something.
Yes, he's like the rival poet of Socrates, if you will. Like,
okay.
There's a lot of them around at the same time, but it's only Gorgias is the one that Socrates really has trouble with. But Gorgias is all about skepticism. He's kind of like maybe the father of skepticism. And so... this essay was saying that Walter Raleigh is super into this whole skepticism thing, but as you and I have pointed out, so is, because this essay was pointing that Walter Raleigh's getting it from Agrippa, but so is our boy.
Yeah.
So maybe Philos could be Philip Sidney.
Yeah, because why would, it doesn't make any sense why Raleigh would call himself that, especially, I don't know, especially with someone who already has such a prevalence to already use that,
right?
You know, and it's like... But
the interesting question is, if Philip Sidney's signing it as Philos, who's Cygnus? Who's John Marston? Who's Ben Jonson? Who's George Chapman?
Right.
Are any of these different than our Shakespeare writer, or any of these our Shakespeare? You know, so yeah, we got a lot of names, a lot of pieces. We'll leave that as food for thought.
But yeah, otherwise, as far as like the channel, it's been, you know, we started back up in August of this year, right?
Yeah.
We kind of jump-started our channel back up, and just started trying to make videos.
It was about a year ago we
yeah.
filmed our Sydney video,
Yep.
and then I was busy working, you were busy raising kids, and we didn't know if we wanted to fully keep doing it, and we were like, you know, screw it. We made that video, let's at least put it out, and then, you know, it got some views, and it was like, all right, you know what, let's
try the Henslowe video, because that was one of the big pieces that you had found, and that I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely tantalizing.
Took off.
I guess the rest of everyone else thought it was a good video too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're up to 240 subscribers now, and hopefully we will double that by the end of next year. You know, once we've actually spent a whole year making videos or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, we got so much planned to come. Not just more of this looking for the true authorship of Shakespeare and the Philip Sidney fan club here, but bring in some of the other tangent stuff. Comparing the best renditions of a Shakespeare play, or maybe which is the worst Shakespeare play.
I want to do that soon. I want to, like, everybody talks about, oh, Hamlet's the best, or which one's the best, but like nobody really talks about, like, what's Shakespeare's bad stuff, and like how bad does it get, and like
can it be so offensive that it just, like, man, it doesn't even matter if you wrote Hamlet.
Like,
if you read Pericles, like, God, it's
exactly, like, he's a hack. So I don't know. That's a fun topic. At some point, I hope that Brady and I have enough time to do some actual edited content. Like, we're doing these sort of, they're not quite live streams, but these podcasts are sort of done like live streams. Brady does some editing afterwards, but like we're not having to put tons of clips and musics and visuals and voiceover and B-rolls and but I think if you and I had enough time, we would like to put some stuff like that together. So stay tuned for that. Maybe in the next coming year. Maybe that's a New Year's resolution to get something like that together. But in the meantime, we will keep the podcast rolling. Going to get some shorts out to you. For you guys that are big Shakespeare doubters, going to keep going with the heavy research. For you folks just that like talking about Shakespeare, we're going to have some lighter content too. Film reviews, play reviews,
book hauls.
Book hauls. Anything like that. So
thanks for sticking with us. It's been a fun ride. I'm glad to see. There's just been it's always fun to kind of see a steady growth. Still, even if it's just one every few days, it's still noticeable. So it's been.
And before we sign off, I want to give 6 Days Theater a super duper shout out, and Anderson and Savannah. They've been commenting, and Soltron. They've been commenting on just about every video we got. 6 Days Theater, if you get a chance to read his comments, they're like, almost essay length, but they're so incredibly thought-provoking, thoughtful. He's been specifically talking about Giordano Bruno, and some of his thought, and one of his recent comments he was talking about. It's interesting that he always took for granted that so much of this thought came from Bruno, but if the dating on Philip Sidney stuff is correct, that some of this stuff is maybe already at Sidney before he's getting to hang out with Bruno, and maybe some of it goes the other way. And like, I don't know, that sort of goes towards what you and I have been seeing with Sidney, that like you want to say he's getting it from somewhere, but like it always seems to come from him first, like that he's the initial thinker of the idea,
prima motor.
Yeah, there you go.
Unless I guess Gates would be like, no, it's John D, and you'd be like, okay.
But like John D, it's all happening here, but how does it get out there? Yeah,
right.
Folks, check out 6 Day Theater's comments. They're fantastic. But all of you guys, keep watching, keep liking, subscribe if you haven't, send it to folks that might be interested, leave comments. We love responding to comments. We love reading, liking, loving comments. So keep doing that. Stay tuned for some future episodes. Have a wonderful holiday, and we will see you guys soon. I'll let Brady sign us out.
Nullis in verba.